Hello, friends. My name is Lara Molatier, and I am from Everyday Graces Homeschool. And today I am going to share with you one of my favorite topics about the legacy of building a home library. So, why is it worth the work to build a library that your children's children can enjoy? What makes it a worthwhile expenditure of our time and our financial resources to build a library in our homes? So, today we're going to talk about why we read. We're going to talk about how to choose worthy books for your home library. And we're going to talk about how to build a home library within your family's budget. I'm going to share a few of my favorite quotes with you that sort of encapsulate why we read. Mortimer Adler, the author of the wonderful book, How to Read a Book, says, "In the case of good books, the point is not to see how many of them you can get through, but rather how many can get through to you. You are never going to be the same person as you were before you read a book as you are after you read a book, because books have the ability to prompt us through stories to become more like the people that we aspire to be." Charlotte Mason, who all of us homeschoolers are familiar with, says the question is not how much does the youth know when he has finished his education, but how much does he care? And about how many orders of things does he care? In fact, how large is the room in which he finds his feet set? And therefore, how full is the life he has before him? Books open up worlds to us. We have the limited capacity as a human being to only live our one life in person, but books allow us to live 1,000 other lives in 1,000 other places, in 1,000 other trials, in a way that affects us and helps us to become better people and more thoughtful people and more caring people. And it will help us to use our discernment better, because we have not our experience, but the experience of seeing how certain decisions play out in books. And so it develops our moral imagination and our character when we read. C.S. Lewis says the best safeguard against bad literature is a full experience of good, just as a real and affectionate acquaintance with honest people gives a better protection against rogues than a habitual distrust of everyone. This is why we need to build home libraries, friends. It doesn't have to be huge, but having a small collection of worthy and wonderful books allows us to give our children hands on, all the time, ready to be used literature and biographies and stories that will affect them and show them what good literature looks like. It will develop their critical thinking skills. It will give them things that they can converse with their siblings and with you about. So it is imperative that we have at least a small collection in our homes of really quality, good books. Thatcher Wine, the author of a very wonderful book called, oh goodness, How to Build a Home Library, wrote, "In the fast-paced, digitally saturated, screen-overloaded era we live in, we believe that printed books are a refuge of space and time. It's okay to slow down and read. It's okay to fill your home and your shelves with printed books and to celebrate the comfort and meaning they provide in our lives. We think it's something that we all crave, whether we know it or not." The last several years, even the homeschool community has been overtaken with the minimalist aesthetic and mode of homekeeping. And I would argue that when it comes to books, you should be a maximalist. And I know that it looks as if the trends are starting to go back more to traditional housekeeping and having things on the walls and things on your shelves and bookshelves to fill. But I would caution you that you will never have a corner filled with books that is a bad thing. If worse case scenario, something happens and you have more books than you have furniture, you can still sit on a book while you read another one. Um, I joke mostly, but it really is. It is a worthwhile thing for you, for your children, for your children's children, that you collect a small library. And when we do that, when we curate a library, it also shows our children that there are things worth keeping. There are things worth holding on to for posterity's sake. And hard copies of books are certainly one of those. If it's a hard copy instead of a digital or an audio copy, you cannot go in and change it. So here are some of my biggest reasons that I believe people read. We read to know we are not alone. We read to understand the past, the present, and how to navigate the future. We read to learn, to challenge ourselves, and to broaden our minds. We read to be encouraged and inspired. We read to enter other worlds, times, and places. We read for comfort and companionship. We read because literature is a preservation tool for humanity, and we will talk about that more later. But I think, especially for Christians, we read because we know inherently that we are part of a story that is greater than ourselves. And reading all these other stories from all these other peoples and times and places, it's very similar in that way as when we read the Bible. It shows us a glimpse at the past that we weren't able to be part of, but a book takes us there. The Bible takes us back through history and helps us see the family in Christ that came before us. And it's very much the same when it comes to humanity and reading. Now we're going to talk about worthy books. What makes a worthy book? How do you define a worthy book? We're going to discuss my little acronym here. So for a worthy book, you want a whole book and a wholesome book. A whole book, we prefer non-abridged versions. There are very, very, very few books where I would recommend beginning with an abridged version. Now, an abridged version is going to be different than a retelling. We have used retellings in our home for many years, and I keep them on the shelves because they're really good references. But things like Nesbitt and Lamb's Shakespeare tale books, those are great introductions. They're even good for reviewing before you dive into the full plays. But that's a little different than an abridgment. The only book that I believe I have intentionally gotten an abridgment for was to introduce my boys to the Count of Monte Cristo. Um, the abridged version is still a full length novel, if you are not familiar, but it gave one of them a really good handle on the story. The other, it gave him the desire to read the full version. So sometimes certain classics like that are actual tomes, are worth getting an abridged copy in addition to having the real one, I would say. But it is good to have the whole book when you are building your home library. Worthy books take us on an odyssey. Worthy books are rereadable. Worthy books are timeless. Worthy books show us humanity. And worthy books are yours. You get to define all of these things to build your library because your family is unique. So let's talk about wholesome. We've addressed whole, which means the actual book, not the abridged version. If you are reading a book that is from a different language that has been translated into English, I recommend looking up all the translations and finding people that you trust their discernment on and reading their reviews of the translations to pick the one that you think is going to be best for your family. But wholesome, the definition, according to Webster's 1828, tending to promote health, favoring health, salubrious, as wholesome air or diet, a wholesome climate. Sound, contributing to the health of the mind, favorable to morals, religion, or prosperity, as wholesome advice, wholesome doctrines, wholesome truths. Useful, salutary, conducive to public happiness, virtue, or peace, as a wholesome law. That utters sound words, just like Proverbs 15:4 says, a wholesome tongue is a tree of life. Kindly, pleasing, as a wholesome answer. A wholesome book is one that builds us up. It is one that is truthful. It is one that is honest. It is one that will allow conversations to happen around the content. It does not glorify the villain. One of the things that has become very prominent in literature over the last 40 years is what I call twisted fairy tales, where the vampire or the wizard or the dragon, where those become the good guys. Twisted fairy tales allow the wolf to win in the end, and it's somehow justified that Little Red Riding Hood got eaten. Those sorts of things are not what falls under the wholesome category. That doesn't mean that there's not going to be anything negative. There is often hardship, trial. There can even be violence. Certainly not gratuitous violence that's super detailed in its description, but a wholesome book will have hardships because that's life. We have hardships in life, and a wholesome book is going to show consequences for the villains. It's going to show sometimes that our main character makes a bad choice and then has to deal with the consequences of that. It's going to show repentance, redemption. Wholesome stories are good for the soul. They help us develop that moral imagination that is so imperative for navigating life. Worthy books take us on an odyssey. Books take us on a journey. There's so many different quotes from so many different people, but with a book you can live 1,000 lives. You can travel all over the place. You can go down the Silk Road with Marco Polo. There are incredible advantages to reading books that broaden our minds and broaden our horizons. One of my favorite things for middle grades and high school is fairy tales from different cultures. Russian fairy tales, Nordic fairy tales, Viking fairy tales, Irish fairy tales. You've got the Native American folk tales. You've got the folk tales and fairy tales from places like Africa and China. All these things give you a glimpse into those cultures and how they look at life, and that is something that is very helpful for our children in understanding why certain people are the way that they are, why certain countries are the way that they are. Learning about geography through living books that teach you about the places, that also helps because the geography often defines how those people have lived for hundreds or thousands of years, and it allows our children to become world citizens. They are able to look at things with a much broader and deeper perspective than a lot of people who don't read. Worthy books are rereadable. Francois Mauriac says, "Tell me what you read, and I'll tell you who you are is true enough. But I'd know you better if you told me what you reread." The books on our shelves tell a story. They tell a story of who we were, who we are, and who we aspire to be. The books with the worn covers and the bent pages that have been visited multiple times are an insight into the things that speak to us. Everybody should have at least a few books on their shelves that they have reread. Often these books will be classics. They might even be, considered sort of modern classics. But there are books that teach us different things at different points in our lives. Great Expectations is certainly an excellent read for your high schooler, but they won't get nearly as much out of it from that read as they will when they go back to read it in their 30s. The same can be said for books like Gift from the Sea by Anne Morrow Lindbergh. That book is not meant for 20-year-old women, but I would recommend 25-year-olds read it and read it again at 35 and again at 45, because it's one of those books that you get something different from every time you read it. So our worthy books are rereadable by us and by our children. And that's one of the beautiful things about picture books as well. And you will notice our children will always gravitate to one or two favorite picture books when they're little. And the reason is usually because they are beautiful books. They are true books or they are funny books, but they are favorites. And so you want books on your shelves that are favorites that can be reread. Worthy books are timeless. Stories that ring with truth never become obsolete. What is learned from a timeless tale will hold true in every age. Classics are classics for a reason. We have a lot of people in the world now pushing back, saying that classics are old, they're regressive, we don't need to read them anymore, they don't have any value anymore. I would argue the fact that the culture says that means that you should be reading even more of them. But you have your Dickens, you have your poetry, you have Shakespeare. All those things are worthy books. They are worthy reads. Now, Shakespeare is not necessarily meant to be read, but it is good to have a few hard copies on your shelves because there's just incredible language in Shakespeare. You have books by Nathaniel Hawthorne. A lot of people don't like them anymore. But again, they were classics. There are so many things that people have lost. Very few people read Spencer Green's The Fairy Queen anymore. It's a beautiful piece of work. We have Plutarch, Herodotus, all of these classics that have fallen by the wayside were read over and over for hundreds and thousands of years. Sometimes the Odyssey, the Iliad, Beowulf. All of these things are worthy reads. They teach us about humanity. The truths that they teach are timeless. People being drawn in by power. That's a story that's told over and over and over because it's true. Those stories are supposed to fill our moral imagination with warnings so that we, if we feel ourselves being drawn to something like that, have that sort of automated roadblock that comes up and says, hey, wait a minute, this is how this always ends. Do we really want to go down that road? You want books like that on your shelves, and you want stories that appeal to every age group that fall within that category. So, yes, worthy books are always going to be timeless because truth, we know, does not change. Talking about humanity, literature is the one thing that even throughout the ugliest periods of history still helps people to hold on to humanity. During the Bolshevik Revolution and the gulags, Alexander Solzhenitsyn wrote about how important it was to have those things that remind you of your humanity. So here we have Barbara Tuchman. She says books are the carriers of civilization. Without books, history is silent, literature dumb, science crippled, thought and speculation at a standstill. Without books, the development of civilization would have been impossible. They are engines of change, as the poet said, windows on the world and lighthouses erected in the sea of time. They are companions, teachers, magicians, bankers of the treasures of the mind. Books are humanity in print. And we know that this is true because throughout time, every society that has burned books has done so to reduce the humanity of whatever group was being targeted. We know that in Germany, Hitler had huge book banning parties of books that were written by Jews or other groups that he did not think were human. And so it is imperative to have these bits of history and humanity and beauty on our shelves in our homes. Your library, though, is yours. And worthy books are also yours. You get to define what falls under each of these definitions. Your unique family will influence what books you choose to put in your library, keep in your library, and pass on from your library. Your personal collection should be just as unique as your family and not like anyone else's. So please don't think that there's a specific list. The lists that you find on the internet are great starting points. We have several of them on our blog. But those are books that have spoken to our family. Your family may be different. It should be different. And so you need to remember as you are deciding how large you want your library, what you want in your library, that those have to fit within your family's framework. There is no right or wrong. It's just unique to your family. And so don't compare what you decide is going to work for you with what you see on Instagram or Pinterest or your favorite homeschool blogs. When you start building your library, a home library is a collection of interests, a window into the past, a connection to other cultures, and a source of inspiration. There is a wonderful study from 2018 where over 160,000 adults in 31 countries participated. They found that the more books that were present in a childhood home, the more proficient the adults were in three important areas, which were literacy, math, and using technology to communicate and to gather and analyze information. I thought these numbers were interesting, so I included them. 80 books resulted in average levels, with proficiency increasingly improving up to around 350 books, after which performance leveled off. So, again, you don't have to have a huge collection. We have around 3,000 books in our home, but I have been collecting a home library since I was 8 years old, an intentional home library since I was 8 years old, and I am now over 40. So do the math. It's taken me a long time to put all that together. And quite a few of ours at this point are history books, because I also have a history lover, and we have a fair number of science books because I also have a science lover. So your library, again, will be cultivated around your children. My part of the library is a lot of literature selections because that is what I love. So your library is going to look different according to your family. But cultivating a home library also has the advantage of hard copies, which prevents the book from being edited into whatever is considered politically correct at the time. We learn from history, and when it is altered or erased, we no longer have that window into the past, but a blurred or even destroyed image. This prevents us from building our critical thinking muscles and from deep discussions on morality and ethics. There have been instances in recent years where even children's books have been edited to reflect what is considered proper now. And I would argue that that gives a disadvantage to our children because language and references and things like that show us the mentality of the people and what they were doing. They don't excuse them. They just give us a window into whatever was going on at the time that these books were written, that we perhaps have moved past in a good or bad direction. But there are things in books that help us understand different times and different people. And when those are altered to fit our modern taste, then it becomes less than truth. It is not an accurate representation of the book when it was written. And so we have to be really careful with certain things as far as that goes, because we want to be able to share the good and bad parts of history with our children. That's how they learn. That's how the future generations get to make actual progress toward a better world. And so we need to be careful with that. And that is why I do advocate for hard copies of books. I have a Kindle. I love e-readers. I don't think there's anything wrong with them, but those copies can be edited, and you will never know unless you have the hard copy in hand to compare. When you are building your library, you want to include stories to make us brave. You want to include stories that inspire chivalry and virtue, like The Green Ember, The Wing Feather Saga, Sir Knight of the Splendid Way. Those are all excellent books for that. A lot of Shakespeare's histories have some fabulous virtue and bravery and hard discussions in them as well. Henry V is a favorite here. You want to include biographies of missionaries, leaders, and survivors of incredible trials because we need to be able to understand that there are people that have gone before us, that have suffered before us, and that made it through, or even if they didn't, they made it beyond into a better place. And we need to have that instilled in our children because knowing that there is more after this life is also a very big source of hope. So, some of our recommendations are biographies on like Amy Carmichael, Jim Elliot, church martyrs, America's founders, Gulag survivors for your high schoolers, things like that. Don't be afraid of stories where there is evil and hardship. Our children are in the world, and we cannot protect them from the knowledge that it is a broken place. But we can instill in them courage and hope and give them examples of brave men and women to inspire them to live well in the face of hardships. Your library should include books that are beautiful. Beauty is a vessel for truth. Filling our homes with beauty allows us to create a fortress against the ugliness in the world, not only by hanging lovely pictures, choosing our decor and colors carefully, and crafting welcoming spaces do we make our homes a haven, but the beauty in our books creates a world within our home that speaks to the moral imaginations of our families. Include books of beautiful poetry and prose, fairy and folk tales that illuminate other cultures, books with lovely illustrations, and books that look inviting from the shelf to draw our children to them. If you like to collect Easton Press books, and I do, but I do not have very many of them because they reduced my book budget faster than I like for it to be reduced. But I have found some on Marketplace and thrifting. So I do have a few, but they're beautiful leather bound editions with gold gilding on them. Sometimes it's just nice to have a couple books on your shelf that are exquisite to look at from the front of the shelf. That's okay if you do that. I also have collections where I have the same story. It's just illustrated by different illustrators that I love. I have some Victorian books that have the color plate illustrations that are fantastic. Um, it is good to have beauty in your home. It is good to have books that are beautiful. The content can be beautiful. The illustrations can be beautiful. The cover of the book can be beautiful, but you do want to have some things in there that are there just because it's beautiful. Beauty is not as subjective as people would like you to believe. If it is truly beautiful, then it expresses some form of truth. There is a very spiritual connection to beauty because everything was made to be good. And now that we are in a broken creation, it is not anymore, but we have the ability to curate a collection of beauty in our homes through our libraries. We also want stories to make us think. A library should have at least one book in it that whomever visits those shelves hates. The book will be different for every visitor. You should have a wide swath of different kinds of books in your library. You want to include source documents, historical writings from multiple viewpoints, biographies by people who both admire and admonish the subject. Include fiction that shows real consequences for the villains, hard decisions and wrong choices with repentance for the heroes, and help your children think through what and how they would do in the same circumstance. These are really important things to just do with our kids anyway, as we are raising them to be adults. And so here are our 5 simple steps to start building your library. Decide on a small collection of titles for each age range. These are books that you don't have yet, or if you do have them, you're going to put them aside and so that you can start your collection. You're going to begin collecting them and tracking them. You do have a free library building journal download that is with this workshop. I hope you enjoy it. You add in treasures as you find them. Not everything that you put on your list is going to make up your whole library. When you're out thrifting or visiting family and friends that are cleaning out, and you see a book that you want to bring home, bring it home. and sometimes those treasures turn out in the end. We decide we don't need them or we don't want them, and then at that point, it's okay to pass them on. You are curating your library, and it is a constant thing. It is not a once and done deal. Curate your collection as you go. Don't be afraid to cull as you go. One of the things that you need to be aware of, there are things you always check for when you are building a library of used books. There is mold, mildew, spine damage, missing pages, or unpleasant smells. Mold is something that if you bring into your library, it will spread and it will ruin all your books. You want to check too for book lice. That's a real thing. Um, if you see like little holes in the sides of the pages, be aware. There are ways to treat some of these or to fix the books, but overall, if the book meets two of these criteria, then don't bring it home and put it in your library. Where to find books are thrift stores, Goodwill, library sales. There are a lot of Instagram small book sellers. One of my favorite hashtags to look for is when they do the For the Love of Books sale. Yard sales, friends and family, local bookstores, eBay, Etsy, antique shops, and little free libraries are a wondrous resource. So, those are our tips for getting started. Thank you guys so much. You can find us at everydaygraceshomeschool.com. You can find us on Instagram at Lara's Place, and you can find our podcast at Cultivating Grace on Spotify and other podcast delivery services. So, you all have a wonderful day, and thank you so much for joining us and building your home library.